Hi everyone, Dr. Mike here. In this video, we're going to take a look at the 3 layers of connective tissue that line the brain to protect it, called the meninges. So when we look at these meninges, like I said, they're connective tissue and there's 3 particular layers. Now we're going to start with the layer most adherent to the brain tissue itself. These meninges line not just the brain, but also the cerebellum and the brainstem and the spinal cord as well. We're going to focus on how these 3 layers line or wrap themselves around the brain itself. First layer, the one most adherent to the brain, is like tissue paper. Imagine if you were to get wet tissue paper and put it on your hand, it's going to become adherent to all the creases and folds of your hand, and this is what this first layer does. So I'm going to take my blue pen and I'm going to draw this first layer as though it's extremely intimate with all the folds and creases of the brain, of the cerebellum, of the brainstem, and so forth. Now this layer is termed the pia mater. Now pia itself means soft. Mater means mother. So this is the soft mother, the most adherent layer to the brain itself, and it goes through all the folds, lumps and bumps, which are called the gyri, sulci, and fissures. And like I said, this one is called the pia mater. Now, the next layer we need to talk about is called the arachnoid mater. And the arachnoid mater, I'm going to draw up like this. And you can see that there's a bit of a space between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater. And this space is important because what you're going to find is that this arachnoid mater, let's write it up. Now you probably heard the word arachnoid before. Arachnoid means spider. So spider mother. Why would it be called spider mother? Because this layer has connective tissue projections that bind with the underlying pia mater. And it looks like a spider web's projections, like you can see here. So what we have is the arachnoid mater with its connective tissue projections called trabeculae. I'll write that up as well. So these connections are called trabeculae, and they are adherent to the pia mater. Trabeculae. The third layer is what we call the dura mater. And the dura mater, dura means tough. If something's durable, something is tough, right? So we've got this dura mater here. And there is a small space between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater. And this dura mater is actually adherent to the skull itself. So we could even draw the skull here adherent to the dura mater. Now the skull is not one of these meningeal layers. The skull is obviously part of bony tissue. It's part of the skeletal system. And let's write skull. And obviously overlying the skull is going to be skin as well. So you're going to have, going from most superficial to deep, you're going to have skin, skull, dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater. Now let's talk about some important points. These are the 3 layers. Let's number it so that you're aware, right? Pia mater, arachnoid mater, and dura mater. Now let's talk about the spaces. There is a space you can see between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater, and because it's underneath the arachnoid mater, we call it the subarachnoid space. So let's write that down. Let's put all the spaces over here. This is the subarachnoid space. So there's one space. The next space is the space underneath the dura mater but above the arachnoid space. This is what we call the subdural space. Subdural. And then there's a space between the dura and the skull itself, which is called the epidural or extradural space. Let's do it here. Epidural or extradural space. Now the question is, why do we need to know the spaces? Well, you need to know the spaces because when it comes to the clinical relevance, you can have bleeding, and this bleeding can happen in a couple of different spaces. So the bleeding can happen in the extra or epidural space, so the space between the bone and the dura. This often happens when you break the bone, and often when it happens at the temple as well, and you damage what's called the meningeal arteries. You can have a bleed in the subdural space, the spot between the dura and the arachnoid mater. You can have bleeding in the arachnoid space, the subarachnoid space, and you can have bleeding in the brain tissue itself. This is called an intracerebral hemorrhage. So, a bleeding in the epi or extradural is called an epidural or extradural hematoma because the bleeding is usually stuck to one particular area. If it's in the subdural, it's subdural hematoma. If it's in the arachnoid or subarachnoid space, it's called a subarachnoid hemorrhage because it usually continues to bleed and spread through. And intracerebral can be an intracerebral hemorrhage too, often due to stroke. So these are the three particular layers of the meninges and how and where they protect the brain.